Good evening and welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to have you here. We're jumping straight into things today. We've got a fair amount to cover, though not as much as some of the other days. And since I had kind of ran out of time, I've got a little bit, things are a little bit disjointed, but still we're going to cover everything that's important to cover. We'll go ahead and start off just to kind of warm things up with a few comments from journalist Jason J. Smart. That would be starting, hold on a second here. Yep, okay, that's the right one. From Jason J. Smart, for less than 5% of the Pentagon budget, we are deterring our enemies from future wars. The defeat of Russia is a blow to Iran, North Korea, and China, an investment that will pay off by preventing our soldiers from going to war. Supporting Ukraine is our national security. And I see exactly where he's coming from here. The truth is that if we had bloodied Vladimir Putin's nose in March of 2022, or even September of 2022, or halfway through 2023, if we'd done it then, this would be over at this point in time. We would have pushed Vladimir Putin right back into his country, and there would have probably been no response to the nothing happening in Israel, likely, though that might have been in planning, so it might have at least partially happened. But the arguments about it probably wouldn't have taken place. North Korea wouldn't be sending weapons to Russia. Iran wouldn't be sending to Russia. China would not be doing some under-the-table banking to support Russia. These four nations have gotten together because we did not push them back into their borders early enough in this war. So overall, yes, while 5% of the Pentagon budget may be all we're spending on this, it still is something that we wouldn't even have to spend this much if we'd done it right in the first case. Hi, Jenna. Glad to have you on board, always. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll go ahead and keep on piping in. Now, you may be familiar with, or not, Garry Kasparov. He is the Russian chess champion that was there for many years, and he has since left Russia and is now part of the World Leadership Congress, and is very much in favor of Western ideals. So one of the elements that put the lie to pro-Kremlin advocates and their Ukraine can never defeat Russia BS. Ukraine doesn't have to conquer Moscow. It only has to make the Russian invasion and occupation unsustainable and unprofitable for Putin. And he goes into a lot more of the details on this. Tighter sanctions, especially ones on middlemen, are as important as battlefield gains. Putin's oligarchs and Russian society more broadly must feel the pressure. When Putin sees that continuing the war is a greater threat to his power ending it, it will end. And yes, they still have to defeat Russian forces on the battlefield and have to push things back. But until Vladimir Putin sees that his opportunities to maintain his rule and carry out this war are at an end, then he won't stop it. As it is, if he wanted to stop it, he could literally just say, come out and say, do something big, say, okay, hey, look, we have now denazified Ukraine. It's not true. There aren't any Nazis to speak of in Ukraine, but he could say it. And then he could say, and we will do a package pullout of Ukraine so that we can focus on our own issues over here in Russia, making certain that our people are fed and cared for, that our roads are taken care of, that our flooding issues are taken care of, etc. And he could pull out and lose virtually nothing in the end. But he won't do it. As Jason J. Smart says, Putin is a little man who has stolen too much money. If he loses power, he'll go to jail, lose his money, and die. So what did he have to do? He had to create a foreign enemy, and that is what Ukraine has become. Moving on to the S-200 missiles. Now, one of the interesting things that's been popping up recently is this information that is stating in recent times that Ukraine has been using old S-200 air defense missiles to take out Russia's finest aircraft, the A-50s that went down, a couple of fighter jets in just recent days. And this is the S-200. This doesn't have the range to do what they're saying it did. It doesn't have the capabilities to do what they say it did. So, how? Well, how did that work? And this article from the Kiev Post goes through the whole kind of the technical information on the S-200 system. I'll go ahead and put that link right here. And it talks about its capabilities as it was designed, its history, things like that. Then they go into what I have to term as speculation. They may have, for instance, to increase the flight range to cover a 308-kilometer shoot down. They may have taken the missile warhead and downsized it, and then used that extra weight to put more rocket fuel in it to therefore extend its range. They may have also modernized the guidance system, eliminating the need for the target illumination or manual control from the ground. And during the final stage of the flight, they may have modified it so it could capture the target in fully autonomous automatic mode. There could have been other countries involved, and they could have done other things. They may have used a more portable continuous wave radar that was taken to an area where the aircraft were expected to be operating, and via coordination with the launcher, the portable radar illuminated the target at the really close to the plane, allowing the missile to not have to go, the radar to not have to cover that whole distance. So a lot of possibilities there. In addition, they point out that the S-200 system is not one that it's not on a truck by nature. So they may have modified it to sit on a chassis with wheels and therefore been able to move it to very close to the front lines. We do know from the Ukrainian reports that they set this all up and then waited for an entire week for the opportunity to do these shoot downs. And as that it indicates that they made some special preparations to pull it off and really did with the extra mile to make that happen. Now, one of the things that comes up often is this concept that Ukraine should surrender. They should give up. They should stop, because the longer they fight, the more they're going to lose. The longer they fight, the more people are going to die. The longer they fight, the more territory they're going to lose. And every time that comes up, it bothers me. The founding fathers, the patriots that began the war against Britain, they were wealthy men. They were the oligarchs of their day in the Americas. If they had just kept working with the British, they would have stayed wealthy and all this type of things. And yet many of them died horrible deaths. Penniless, or captured and killed by the British, or many other possibilities there. These were patriots because they believed that something was worth fighting for. This is Lydia. She is 98 years old. She walked more than 10 kilometers using a stick in one hand and a cane in the other. She evacuated from the occupied part of the village of Otratina in the Donetsk region. She walked the entire day without food and water. She even came under Russian shelling, under Russian attacks that threw her into the grass. But she got up and continued walking until she was seen by Ukrainian soldiers who took her in and brought her behind friendly lines. She walked this distance. And she did not want to be under Russian control. 98 years old, she'd know what it means to be under Russian control. So she walked that distance for freedom. For freedom to be away from the thumb of Russian rule. And if you're telling me that it's not worth that extra effort to make sure that people like Lydia can have the opportunity to not live under the boot of Russian aggression, then I'd say, what are we investing that money for at all? If this isn't worth fighting for, then what is? They're fighting for their country. They're fighting for their future. They're fighting for their freedom. This is a country that has thrown off the horrendous corruption that is involved in being in Russia's satellite, being a Russian orbit, the country in Russia's orbit. They broke off from the Soviet Union in 1991 when it collapsed, and yet they still remained closely tied to Russia for a couple of decades until in 2013 there was a what they call a color revolution, where they finally the president of Ukraine at the time had said, no, we're getting rid of the whole idea of going to the EU, we're going to Russia. And the people rose up, and the government cracked down brutally, repressed them, stopped them, killed and maimed and wounded many. And yet the people of Ukraine wanted to be free. And so they threw off the Russian-sponsored government. And they stood up a new elected government that represented their will to be closer to the European Union. Now we have people like Lydia. 10 kilometers, it's about 6 miles, in war conditions, crossing lines so she could be free. Moving on to the news out of Ukraine itself. The new wave of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine are exploiting the growing shortage of key air defense systems and ammunition and forcing Ukraine to call for even more air defense help. This is the Russians have been pulling out all the stops. They've got more glide bombs going in, more systematic strikes, more Shahed drones, everything that they can throw at Ukraine right now, trying to impact their energy infrastructure, their civilian lives, and understand that many of these attacks are targeted directly at civilian places where people live, places where people work, places that have nothing to do with the military. And since these are all guided munitions, these are all deliberate targeted strikes. Russia has attacked Ukraine's thermal power plants nearly 180 times since the start of the full-scale war, and they've been intensifying these attacks. Now, Ukraine's been responding. They've been hitting their oil infrastructure. They've been hitting any of their military airfields. They've been, I think, mostly accidentally or incidentally, also hitting some of their electrical infrastructure, though every time they've hit something like a substation or something like that, the Russians have said it was because the Russians shot down the drone. I don't know. But either way, this is Russia's method of doing it. Now, this is night before last. Russia attacked Ukraine with 9 drones overnight, which is a relatively light attack, but these hit Mykolaiv. And you can see the building right back here showing the damage done by just that little drone. 5 of those drones were shot down by Ukrainian forces. Odessa, the pictures, these are probably the least disturbing pictures out of Odessa. There was at least 4 reported deaths. Missiles struck this I believe it's called a castle in this area. Civilian deaths, not military ones. They also was a dog that died as well, and no, I'm not mentioning that just because I've got a soft spot for animals. The pictures of the pictures of the young woman whose dog perished as she was walking him in a park and was hit by a Russian missile are absolutely heartbreaking. And this is what Ukraine is fighting against. Russia doesn't care. Russia doesn't want Ukraine. They want Ukraine's resources. They want Ukraine's grain. They want Ukraine's lithium deposits. They want Ukraine's oil. They don't want any Ukrainians to come along with it. Not unless they're there voluntarily, of course. But that was the attack on Odessa. Hey, Steve, glad to see you here. Most of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence lost a great deal. Yes, they did. And I have not studied that lately, but I think it's probably time for me to go and do an update on what happened to our signers of the Declaration of Independence. Today marks the 106th anniversary of the raising of the Ukrainian flags with the ships of the Black Sea Fleet and the Sevastopol Fortress. Now, let me see. 106 years would be sorry, 1918, the end of World War One, where there was a brief period where Ukraine was an independent sovereign state, including with Crimea and thus Sevastopol. Uh, and there was a period there between World War One and World War Two where Ukraine was its own separate, entirely separate entity. And this commemorates that event, the fact that they were free and able to be independent at that point in time. I thought this was interesting right here. This is a Ukrainian Su-27. And if you look carefully, you'll see there's an iPad on here on the console right here. This is a customized iPad that's specifically intended for use with these Soviet jets. And they're to basically integrate Western weapons and equipment into these old Soviet fighters. They need something to talk the language. Many of these fighters don't have much for modern electronics in them, so this is how they add it. They literally grab an iPad or something similar and give it the stuff. Of course, somebody had to make a silly remark down here, which is right behind my head. The only problem is the app, he said. The first 5 kabooms are free, then you either have to wait for a 24-hour timer to count down or purchase Kaboom Bucks in the App Store. So somebody had to make a joke about it, and that just made me giggle. The Air Force mentioned how they're going to store the F-16 fighters to prevent them from being hit by Russia. The overall situation is they're going to have to dig out some underground storage facilities and bunkers, and this is going to take some time. But in the meantime, they're developing other methods on how to place them, where to place them, and to conceal them, to disperse them to different runways, airfields, and different locations. There's a package deal of things they're going to have to do to conceal the F-16s from the Russians so they can make sure they can use them for the combat that they're intended for. And that's kind of the deal out of Ukraine. Let's go ahead and look at the news out of Russia, and there's some interesting stuff in here as well. Russia's Immortal Regiment March, due to take place on the 9th of March 2024, has been canceled. Now, for context, this is where the families of deceased veterans from the Second World War bring pictures of their family members and talk about this in this context. However, they have basically canceled this Immortal Regiment. They marched together for it, and they've canceled that part of it. They're going to be able to display these portraits in their own cars and in public locations. There's also been Victory Day parades in 5 Russian regions canceled, with security concerns cited in Bryansk, Pskov, Ryazan, Kursk, and Belgorod. These are all in Western Russia and are likely vulnerable to Ukrainian drones, so they're probably looking at that having a large number of civilians and military equipment, and make no mistake, it's the military equipment that's the real concern. And they don't want those to be vulnerable to drone attacks at this time. They do note that this is the second year in a row that this has been canceled, and the victory parades have been curtailed on security grounds. Last year, if I remember correctly, they actually had only one T-34 tank from World War II that they drove as part of the Victory Day parade, and some light armored trucks. So it was a very small Victory Day parade. That may be something similar happening this year, though my understanding is they've dragged some Western tanks and equipment over there. Maybe they'll be using that for their parade, tow it around on trailers. Then again, it probably runs better than the Russian stuff, so they may drive it. I don't know. We'll see. According to Ukraine's military intelligence, they have destroyed 2 locomotives in Russia. Now, this is not a big wow here as far as it goes. 2 locomotives aren't going to be the end of the world for Russia, but every little bit counts, and it's going to be much harder to replace those locomotives. In fact, in World War II, I'm going back there again, but in World War II, in order to keep Russia in the fight, the U.S. sent, I think it was like 1,000 locomotives to Russia in order to give them the ability, and tons of rail cars. Sent all that over so Russia would be able to get their logistics moving and stay in the fight. There's a new military airfield being installed in Belgorod. This has got a runway length of approximately 6,000 feet or 1.8 kilometers, and this would give it the ability to accommodate helicopters and various aircraft types. It's a bit short. I mean, it's a little more than a mile, so it's not that short, but just a touch short for the type of use that you'd have for the faster jets. But they're working on it. I think they're finding that they've got too many losses on their main airfields, and so they're trying to give more opportunities for them to separate their own aircraft out. It could also be a decoy. I don't know. There were some explosions earlier today at Simferopol, and they say the Crimean Bridge was closed again. They've been closing it off and on every time there's been an air strike announced or a missile warning. So Crimea is getting hit pretty repeatedly. We don't have the damage reports from this yet. Going on to, we'll just say it, corruption over in Russia. The chairman of the Nizhny Novgorod Duma was detained in the Donetsk People's Republic for embezzlement. He apparently made off with large-scale amounts of money as part of the, hold on a second, I think they had the number here. I must be misremembering. But he embezzled a whole bunch of funds out of the military supplies that have been going through there. Novosibirsk College, or Novo College, did not jump on the bandwagon to actually have propaganda classes that talked up the special military operation and the need for it and all that kind of stuff. So Russia did not like that at all. Didn't like that somebody was not playing the party line, and therefore they shut down the college. Over in the Kaluga region, a drone crashed and a gasoline tank exploded. This is a night attack with two aircraft-type UAVs, and a gasoline tank with a volume of almost 700 cubic meters exploded. This is just putting the strain on any of the fuel supplies that Russia has. Now, this one, I'm going to talk about it, but just take it with the slightest grain of salt, mainly because this is purely sourced from Ukraine, the main intelligence directorate, over there. So I have no reason to doubt its accuracy, but just remember that not everything is necessarily always 100% accurate when it's coming from one of the combatants in this level here. Like I said, I believe it, but just keep that in mind. The desertion rate among the Russian occupation army is increasing, with the total of 18,000 Russian servicemen having voluntarily left their military units. 12,000 were part of the 8th Combined Army of the Soviet Union, and 10,000 were drafted by Moscow through mobilization. The 2,000 left are contract employees. This is all coming from the Southern Military District, which has been bearing the brunt of the war in Ukraine. Moving back to the theme of corruption, this is Kadyrov's 16-year-old son, Adam. At the request of my dear brother, the head of RSFU Babatar Vakanov, I've decided to appoint Adam Kadyrov as curator of RSFU, or Russian Special Forces University. He is closely familiar with the activities of the famous university, so I believe he'll do an excellent job. And this is that's a 16-year-old kid apparently being put in charge of training Russian special forces. Here's another drone attack on a Russian oil depot in the Artsevo-Smolensk region. You can see here there's 5 fuel tanks here. The damage, it looks like it's completely wiped out all 5 of those tanks. Bryansk region is getting kind of loud. The Ukrainian drones have reportedly hit a power substation there. No reports on if there's significant damage or not. And the KAMAZ automobile assembly plant is on fire in Neberezhny Chelny, Tatarstan. Now let's do a quick, Google map here. We'll do this on the fly. I didn't have the chance to do this first. I'm just curious because this is the first time I've seen this specific thing mentioned here. Now, let's see. Back it out, back it out, back it out. There's Moscow. Belarus. Okay, Ukraine. So let's go ahead and measure distance. And we'll go to Kiev. That is a 939-mile distance, or 1,511 kilometers. Now, they don't specifically report it being an attack by a drone, at least not in these reports. But if so, quite the shot. Another Ukrainian missile strike reported near Zankoy, Russian-occupied Crimea. As of tonight, Russian air defense is active with multiple explosions. More of that. You know, Stephen, I wonder that as well. And considering considering that Kadyrov has got their TikTok army over there, I'd have to guess he probably has gone around and toted a rifle around and shot at targets, but has no actual field combat experience. That's my best guess, knowing what I know about Kadyrov and how he operates. Over in Russia, there's been a series of arrests of journalists who work with Western media. For 3 days in a row, Russian media report about detention of a new journalist. Forbes journalist Sergei Mingazov, Reuters producer Konstantin Gabov, journalist Sergei Karelin, who worked with the Associated Press. So there's 3 different regions and 3 different journalists all arrested by the Russian regime. Now, this is from War Gonzo. That makes it a Russian source here, so keep that in mind. This is, they're talking about these basically building sheds on top of their tanks. They're saying it's very effective, but the main thing I took away from this, besides the fact that it will pre-detonate some of the less sophisticated anti-tank things like, I don't know, RPGs and things like that. But it also has underneath that shed, it's got an electronic warfare suite. For a while, they were sticking pallets of their electronic warfare equipment and jamming gear on top of vehicles. Now they're got that underneath there and the shed over the top, and it's still working apparently to knock the drones out of the way. So we're seeing a lot more of these tank sheds wandering around. Now, if you'll recall, I think it was last video, we talked about the potential for why this war took place. And it was around this idea of Timur Ivanov being arrested and some of this stuff along those lines. So we're traipsing right back into corruption again. Apparently, Ivanov and his accomplices had data on the nuclear installations in the country. And they used this these information schematics to continue their budget embezzlement scheme. Lots of these things. You'll note here that he mentioned specifically that the files list the status of hundreds of top secret military projects with a column with the values of truth or lie in order to distinguish which project statuses are safe for disclosure to Putin, in case he were sent to send an inspector to the construction location. So these secret documents, these classified documents, were found during recent raids on Deputy Defense Minister Ivanov's devices, and then that was passed out to Western audiences after that. So they're embezzling tons of funds from the Ministry of Defense. Big shocker there. Now, this is from Tindar, and I'm going to just point out that Tindar did an analysis that probably is accurate, but talked about maybe things aren't the situation on the front lines is not as rough as it might look. I can see it being accurate, but I can also see people making the case that it's a bit of coping with the situation too. So Tindar's usually really reliable, and I don't want to belittle that at all. Just kind of keep that in mind. This is along the same lines here. But this other metric they're talking about is vehicle hardware and losses, based on the work of Andrew Perpetua. Now, if you pay attention here, we got 56 destroyed vehicles. This is overall lost vehicles and hardware statistics. 56 destroyed for Ukraine and 250 for Russia, or 1 to 4.5. Damaged vehicles, 95 for Ukraine and 211 for Russia, 1 to 2.2. And 9 abandoned for Ukraine and 37 for Russia, with a ratio of 1 to 4.1. This kind of gives you an idea of how much hardware Russia is sacrificing on the altar of these persistent attacks, trying to move forward a little bit at a time. They're paying dearly for much of it. And that's the news out of Russia itself. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front here because we got a ton of things here. Just to kind of touch on real quick. NATO Chief Stoltenberg made an unannounced trip to Kyiv where he prioritized the needs for weapons to Ukraine above their own comfort zones regarding national stockpiles. He stated that stockpiles can be restored while Ukrainian lives lost cannot. Polish farmers have stopped blocking trucks at the Rawa-Ruska Greben checkpoint. Registration and passage of trucks has across the border in two directions is now working as per usual. As my understanding is that was the last checkpoint. So I think that's all clear. Now they do mention that trucks transporting grain are only allowed to transit through. They're not supposed to stop in Poland. A German ex-army officer by the name of Thomas H. Admits to spying for Russia and blamed it on his fear of nuclear war. So he went on trial in Dusseldorf starting today for conducting espionage on behalf of Moscow and leaking state secrets. Russia's got a pretty robust spy organization, and they certainly are good at compromising people. So keep that in mind as you see some of these things. There's no telling exactly what might have happened to bring this man into Russia's orbit. Bear with me a second here. I got to reorganize a few things. Okay, there we go. Back to normal. According to Lithuania's foreign minister, Russian GPS jamming of commercial flights is too dangerous to ignore. Russia's been accused of jamming GPS signals in nearby countries such as Finland as far back as the 2010s, but incidents have skyrocketed in recent months, particularly over the Baltic Sea. Now, I've kind of gone through some of the stuff on this jamming. A lot of it's happening from Kaliningrad. Some of it actually is coming from a location about halfway to St. Petersburg. So we've got a situation where Russia's putting all the civilian flights at greater risk by jamming GPS signals in the European Union. They're just trying to cause chaos over there. The Czech police have concluded that Russian agents were behind the 2014, this is 10 years ago, ammunition depot blast that took place in Czechia. This has been a long-running investigation, and they now know that the Russian military intelligence was involved. The Financial Times reports that Western banks have paid 4 times more taxes to Russia in 2023 than before the all-out war. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons. I can speculate, at least to a certain extent, that Russia has been raising the taxes and fees, and therefore that's the reason why. So even if they have less assets in Russia, those that are there are being taxed much more highly. But that's just my speculation. According to Reuters, Chinese companies have gone underground on Russian payments. They're not doing anything public because they don't want to attract the ire of the United States. In fact, as I understand it, Blinken made a visit over there just a couple of days ago and said basically, you either stop it or we're going to stop it for you. So it's a pretty straightforward threat against China's duplicity in this matter. Germany has also got a group of extremists that they suspect of plotting a coup and trying to work with Russia for it. That's 9 members of this extremist group that they have arrested and are trying. So after all the energy infrastructure getting shot up, it looks like Latvia is donating some energy equipment to Ukraine after those Russian attacks. This includes high voltage transformers previously used at the Riga hydroelectric power plant, and also 60 metric tons of transformer oil and an air compressor. Turkey, who's been a little bit both sides on this one for a while, but Turkey is now in talks with ExxonMobil to secure a liquid natural gas deal in hopes of reducing their reliance on Russian natural gas. Now, I don't expect Turkey to change anything about their modus of operation here. They like to play both sides of this as much as they can. It just might be that the costs of doing Russian business have finally got high enough that they're starting to look back to the West. The fact is, I think it's 21 days now. There's been a rally in opposition to the foreign agents law that's patterned after the one in Russia. It's the government is basically trying to be buddy buddy with Russia, but the people are not. In fact, I know there's at least one more article in here that talks about this. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, here we go. The international media isn't paying enough attention to the scale of the protests in Georgia. The pro-EU protesters that came out against the Russian-style foreign agents law are chanting that Georgians want to be with Europe, not Russia. And if you look at this, look at the enormous crowds here. Now, I'm going to just state that I have not been able to validate this as being accurate and current. So there is always the possibility that it's not absolutely current. But from everything I'm seeing in other sources, this matches. There were 2 Ukrainians stabbed to death in Germany. The soldiers were there on medical leave and were targeted, stabbed, and killed while they were on getting medical treatment in Germany. The Russians are ubiquitous these days. They're all over the place. According to Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, she said in an interview to The Telegraph, the aid provided by the United Kingdom and United States to Ukraine should inspire other countries to follow their example. I'm sure she was giving Olaf Scholz in Germany a look when she did so. This is not directly related to the war in Ukraine, but I think it's one of the knock-on effects here. The Danish government is considering the possibility of conscripting women into the military. Now, that's currently voluntary, so that would, kind of like the same things going on in the United States. But if they're really looking at a serious threat from Russia, they're also seriously considering conscripting their women at the same time. And that's quite the, I think that's quite the change in policy, if they do. Canada will transfer 50 armored personnel carriers to Ukraine, according to Defense Minister Bill Blair. That'll be the first 10 LAV-2 ACSV Super Bison combat vehicles will be sent this summer to Germany, where the Ukrainians will get some training on using them. Russia is happily recruiting Belarusian youth to make drones, and if they do the drone manufacturing in Belarus, that's going to put it pretty much out of contact for Ukraine to be able to touch at this point in time. But either way, the Russians are definitely not too proud to ask the Belarusians to do their work for them. Now, this map shows where aid to Ukraine goes first. Now, we've talked about this a couple times. The way aid to Ukraine works right now is that stuff in our current inventory gets picked up, loaded onto a boat or a plane, and shipped overseas to go to Ukraine. Then new manufacturing contracts are drawn up to manufacture new weapons, current standard, everything like that, to replace the stuff that was drawn out of the U.S. military inventories. If they, therefore, the money that's being spent to arm Ukraine is actually being used to manufacture those replacement parts, those replacement pieces and equipment and rifles and bullets and artillery shells and all that stuff. That's all done in the U.S. So you can see right there, except for the Pacific Northwest and the mountain region, you're pretty much near most of the states in the U.S. are getting at least something out of that aid package. Now, I do know that my senator has been complaining that all this aid to Ukraine and we're not getting anything for Missouri, and yet here's your proof that some of it's coming to Missouri too. But he's always been against providing aid to Ukraine. The United Kingdom estimated Russian casualties at 450,000. That's slightly lower than Ukraine's official estimates. But the UK also observed that tens of thousands more have deserted. So with those numbers not included, it sounds like they'd be pretty similar numbers. This was an interesting story right here. The U.S. purchased dozens, I believe it was 81 non-functional Soviet-era aircraft from Kazakhstan through offshore companies. They were about $20,000 each, so dirt cheap, but they're not functional. They're not currently operational planes. They're being sold effectively for scrap. But they probably have some good parts in them and some good pieces. They could also be used as decoys on airfields. So a lot of possibilities there. And of course, they mentioned that it's actually 117 aircraft. The other numbers I've seen have been 81. There we go. So the U.S. through intermediaries and offshore companies bought 81 of these aircraft, and looks like that's going to be good. But Kazakhstan has denied it. So take your pick. Interesting. It's been reported in multiple places, but the Kazakhs could have easily denied it just because they want to save face. I don't know. We'll see. Australia continues to support Ukraine with another 100 million US dollars worth of aid package. They got a bunch of details, but I mean, just understand that that's a package that they've put out there. Now, from Jason J. Smart, journalist, a hacker collective opposed to Putin has hacked and leaked 7.6 terabytes of data from one of the largest Russian real estate related companies. Now, sanctioned Russian individuals' properties and offshore companies can be identified, which may lead to further asset seizures in the West. So that's data that the Russians don't want to have out there. They'll be able to see exactly what might be held by Russian nationals and what might be paying into Russia's coffers instead, and maybe be able to do something about that. Now, this is going back to January 2nd from Tindar here. The missile which came down on January 2nd in Kharkiv, Ukraine, has been identified as a North Korean Hwasong-11 derivative. It proves that Russia violated the UN Security Council resolution against trading weapons with North Korea, confirming, as Tindar says, the absolute uselessness of the UN body. This would also mean that, according to Chancellor Scholz, that North Korea is now at war with Ukraine for delivering this missile, just like Iran is at war with Ukraine because of the 3,000 Shaheds, which terrorized Ukraine since the beginning of the war. At least according to Olaf's escalation claims, if he sent Taurus to Ukraine. And that's everything on the international front. Let's go ahead and get into the front lines here. We're going to start with the Institute for the Study of War. We're going to talk about their assessment here. Recent Russian gains northwest of Avdiivka have prompted Ukrainian forces to withdraw from other limited tactical positions along the front line west of Avdiivka, though these withdrawals have yet to facilitate rapid Russian tactical gains. Russian forces remain unlikely to achieve a deeper, operationally significant penetration in the area in the near term. And we've kind of seen this as a regular pattern. If there's ever a time where if Russia could lightning shove some troops through, that situation in Otratina is exactly what would be the right spot to do it. They've penetrated much of Ukraine's lines. They could technically, if they could put a good push through there, they could then create havoc behind Ukraine's lines. But they don't seem to be able to do so. However, the Russians have continued their stabilization of the salient northwest of Avdiivka and have apparently decided that they're going to hold off on that kind of a push. They could continue to push towards Pokrovsk or drive northwards to maybe put some pressure on Chasiv Yar. There's a bunch of options there. General Syrsky from Ukraine has noted that there is the threat of a possible future Russian offensive operation against Kharkiv city is causing Ukraine to allocate additional forces and equipment to defending that city, though currently it still looks like the Russian forces are not there to do it. And I have an update on the comments about the M1 Abrams being pulled from the front lines. The Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade denied a recent report that Ukrainian forces had pulled the Abrams from the front line. Whew, that was a lot to cover there. From Astra, General Syrskyi has warned that the situation at the front has worsened. Trying to seize the strategic initiative and break through the front line, the enemy concentrated its main efforts in several directions, creating a significant advantage in forces and means. Actively attacks along the entire front line and has tactical successes in some directions. So this is the basically Syrskyi acknowledging that the situation on the front lines is tough, that they are having to pull back in various places and preserve their soldiers and equipment as best they can. Russia has stated that they have taken Novobakhtivka, which I think is correct, at least at this point in time. But if Russia captures Chasiv Yar, it will gain fire control over key Ukrainian supply routes in the area. Remember, Chasiv Yar is actually on an elevated position compared to all the territory around it. That would endanger the cities of Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. This is the last strongholds for Ukraine in Donetsk Oblast. Ukrainian filmmaker, former Russian political prisoner, and soldier Ola Sentsov shared a photo from Chasiv Yar in Donetsk region, saying, "We are holding Chasiv Yar." Now, we talked about the potential for something expanding near Kharkiv. Russian propagandists have also forwarded that to independent media outlets. And so they've been building a lot more defenses and fortifications up there to try and stop that from happening. I think I've got something else on Kharkiv. Bear with me a second here. Well, not Kharkiv, apparently. This is around Sumy, and I'm just going to touch on this real fast. 4 battalions of Chechens arrived at a distance of 150 to 200 kilometers to the border with the Sumy region, but the Ukrainians are ready for any scenario, they state. Now, 4 battalions of Chechens could be a real problem for Ukraine, especially near Sumy. Sumy's been heating up lately, and we're watching it very closely. It could be an area that kicks off really suddenly, especially if the Russians can build up more forces there. Now let's go over to the front line map. Now the biggest news is the island of Nestriga has been liberated by the Ukrainians. That's this kind of blue outline here, which got the island underneath there. This is significant because it does give them basically full control of the Dnipro River, where it's the wider spot. The Russians have been using this island at various points to try and launch sabotage groups into north of the river. But either way, this makes at least a nice bright spot in the middle of all of the downsides we've been reporting lately. Now, the Russians advanced near Netalova, right here. We'll just take a quick look there. That's a pretty significant advance. Novo Oleksandrivka. Wow, that one's an interesting one there. And that's a pretty significant, though, all open area you notice there. And captured Novomykhailivka, which, of course, we reported earlier. And that just got the last little bits of Novomykhailivka into Russian control. Now, there, I believe, has been an update since then, but let's just do a refresh on the map and see if anything pops up. Boop. More advances near Otratina and Krimik, Krasnohorivka, Kislivka, and they're basically attacking Nestriga, the island we already talked about. So a little bit more updates there, but overall, that's the situation. Now, this is War Gonzo, Russian source. Zaporizhia front, they're saying no changes to the lines of control. Donetsk front, they do report the things we've already talked about, but no major changes beyond that. Berdychi, the Ukrainians have already reported that they've pulled back from there, and I think I've got that a little bit later here. Chasiv Yar, no significant change, though. That's the island of Nestriha there, so you can have it in a different map and get a little more context. Ukraine regaining control over Nestriya Island in Kherson Oblast complicates Russian advances. Basically, it gives the Ukrainians the opportunity to see the Russians coming better. And that's going to make at least a good opportunity for Ukraine to sink any boats they try and send that way. From the Kiev Independent and reporting from Alexander Sirsky, Ukrainian troops have retreated west from Berdychi, Semenivka, and Novomikhailivka villages in Donetsk Oblast. This is a pretty big situation there that's kind of reporting that the Ukrainians don't feel that they can hold it with the material, equipment, and personnel they have. That's rough, but by pulling back, they're saving their lives for when they've got a better advantage. And this is another picture of what things look like north of Avdiivka. You can see this is Otratina right here. It looks like they're reporting the Russians have managed to get even farther along this route here. And we can see they've fully taken Solovyova and Keramik right here. All areas that Ukraine has had to pull back from right here. And that's a situation on the front lines. Now, I've got a couple of interesting extras here. I don't have any other news today beyond the extras because I've got a whole bunch of things I've got in my phone, but I haven't had a chance to transfer them over yet. So we'll talk about those tomorrow. Here's a nose view from a Ukrainian Mi-24D Hind gunship in Army Aviation Service there. Look at how low that thing is flying. Could have got to be about 20, 30 feet in the air. Really just hugging the ground. Now, this is from Dmitry at War Translated. He's really good about finding the unusual odds and ends out there and giving us a translation so we get a better picture of what's going on in the war. And this Russian serviceman is talking about whether it's worth going to Ukraine to earn money. Now, don't have 6.5 minutes to go through the whole thing, but here it is. You'd have to read the subtitles there. He says that only fools would entertain such an idea, as any sense of patriotism fades rapidly once you realize that you want to live. This family evacuated from Bakhmut about 1.5 years ago, bringing all their pets with them. They now live and work all together in an animal shelter. This is just... I've mentioned it several times. You can tell a lot about a people and a person by how they treat their animals. This is just cute and fun here. So here's the cat going after this coffee maker right here. No meaning to it, nothing special. Just funny. It's like the cat really wants his own coffee for today. And finally gives up. And we'll end off with this video. Again, nothing special here as far as the war goes, but I think you'll see what I mean here. Let's unmute this so you can hear at least some of the music. Just the comment here is, can you imagine there is no war? A huge, beautiful world, nature, beauty, the joy of spring. So we can't imagine anymore. But this is a little breath of fresh air.
You are deceiving me. I love you even if you lie. I can't live without you. But you can't live without me. Lie, lie, lie. Life is a lie.
And that's everything for today. I know that there's so much going on in the world and in Ukraine in particular. And I want you to know that I really appreciate you guys being here and being part of these reports. You guys make all the difference. Know you're out there watching and seeing your comments. So I do appreciate it. And on that note, you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next one.